They laughed at him every single day. They called him weak, coward, failure. But years later, when life destroyed him emotionally, financially, and mentally, the same silent man they mocked became the only person strong enough to survive it all. Because while they were busy proving themselves to the world, he was busy mastering himself. In a small, forgotten town surrounded by dry hills and endless winds, there lived a quiet man named Elias. He was not rich, powerful, or famous. He worked in a small repair shop near the edge of the market, fixing broken clocks, old radios, and rusted machines that most people had already given up on. Every morning before sunrise, Elias would walk slowly through the cold streets, carrying his old leather bag filled with tools, while the shopkeepers prepared their stores and children ran laughing through the roads. People noticed him, but not with respect. They noticed him because of his silence. He never argued, never defended himself, and never reacted when people insulted him. At first, the town thought he was simply shy, but over the years their judgment became crueler. Some called him weak, others called him strange. Young boys passing his shop would imitate his slow walk and laugh loudly so he could hear them. A group of men who gathered every evening near the tea stall often joked that Elias had no courage, no pride, and no self-respect because he never answered anyone back. One day a drunk man entered his shop, threw a broken watch on the table, and shouted, "Only a coward stays silent all the time. Maybe you're too afraid to speak, because you know nobody respects you." The entire shop fell quiet for a moment. People outside waited to hear Elias explode with anger, but he simply picked up the broken watch, cleaned the dust from its surface, and calmly said, "The louder the storm, the more valuable peace becomes." The drunk man laughed and walked away, believing he had won, but Elias continued repairing the watch with steady hands, as if the insult had never touched him. The truth was, long before this town judged him, Elias had already fought battles nobody knew about. Years earlier, he had lost his wife during a terrible winter sickness. Soon after, he lost his son in an accident that shattered his entire world. For months he had screamed at fate, cursed life, and drowned himself in anger. But anger changed nothing. His pain remained. One night, sitting alone beside a dying fire, he realized something powerful. Suffering becomes heavier when carried with rage. From that moment forward, he decided to train his mind instead of blaming the world. He began studying the teachings of ancient Stoic philosophers. He learned that a man who cannot control his emotions becomes a slave to the opinions of others. He learned that silence is not weakness when it is chosen with wisdom. Slowly, Elias rebuilt himself. While others chased approval, he chased inner peace. While others reacted to every insult, he practiced patience. And while the town mistook his calmness for fear, Elias understood something they did not. People who constantly seek conflict are already fighting emptiness inside themselves. Every insult thrown at him became another opportunity to strengthen his discipline. Every mocking laugh became a test of his character. Day after day, year after year, Elias remained calm while the world around him became louder, angrier, and more desperate. The market merchants fought over money. Families stopped speaking over small misunderstandings. Friends betrayed each other for personal gain. Yet Elias stayed the same. Even during chaos, he moved with quiet control. One afternoon, a young boy entered his shop crying because older children had humiliated him in front of everyone. Elias handed him a small, unfinished clock and said, "Do you hear anything?" The boy shook his head. Elias smiled softly and replied, "The strongest things often work in silence." The boy never forgot those words. Over time, some people began noticing that despite all the insults Elias received, he always slept peacefully, worked honestly, and carried no hatred in his eyes. Meanwhile, the men who mocked him were consumed by stress, jealousy, and anger. They laughed loudly during the day, but secretly suffered at night. Yet their pride prevented them from admitting it. So instead, they continued targeting the silent man who reminded them of the peace they could never achieve. One summer evening, when the air felt heavy and dark clouds gathered above the town, a wealthy businessman named Victor arrived and purchased the largest building near the market. Victor was known for his arrogance, sharp tongue, and obsession with power. Within weeks, he controlled many local shops by lending money to struggling owners and trapping them in debt. People feared him because he could destroy reputations with a single rumor. Unlike Elias, Victor believed that respect came from dominance and intimidation. He often mocked kindness and called patience a weakness used by failures. The moment he noticed Elias and heard the stories about the quiet repairman who never defended himself, Victor became amused. "So, this is a famous silent man?" He laughed one afternoon while entering the repair shop with several followers behind him. "I expected wisdom, but I only see fear hiding behind calm eyes." Elias looked up from the antique clock he was repairing and greeted him politely. Victor placed a gold pocket watch on the counter and said loudly so everyone outside could hear, "Fix this, and while you work, maybe learn how real men speak." His followers burst into laughter, but Elias simply examined the watch carefully and replied, "Even gold stops working when inside is damaged." The room instantly became quiet. Victor's smile faded for a second because deep inside, he knew the words were true. Despite his wealth, he trusted nobody, slept poorly, and constantly feared losing control. But instead of reflecting on Elias's words, his pride turned into anger. Over the following weeks, Victor made Elias the center of his entertainment. Whenever he passed the shop, he insulted him publicly. He told people Elias stayed silent because he was too broken to stand up for himself. Soon, more townspeople joined the mockery, believing Victor's confidence must mean he was right. One evening, Victor gathered a crowd near the market and shouted, "A man who never fights back deserves no respect." Everyone looked toward Elias, expecting humiliation, but Elias calmly closed his shop, walked toward the crowd, and said in a steady voice, "If someone hands you poison and you refuse to drink it, who does the poison belong to?" Nobody answered. Victor laughed loudly to hide his discomfort, but several people standing nearby felt something shift inside them. Elias continued walking home alone beneath the dark sky, while the crowd slowly dispersed in silence. That night, a violent storm struck the town. Rain flooded streets, powerful winds destroyed roofs, and many shops collapsed under the pressure. In the middle of the chaos, people panicked and ran through the streets, screaming for help. Victor's large building suffered severe damage, trapping several workers inside. Desperate and afraid, Victor shouted orders, but nobody listened because fear had already taken control of everyone. Then, through the storm, Elias appeared carrying ropes and tools from his repair shop. Without shouting, without demanding attention, he organized the frightened townspeople calmly and directed them step by step. His voice remained steady while everyone else lost control. Together, they rescued the trapped workers moments before the building partially collapsed. Victor stood frozen in shock as rain poured down his face. The same man he had humiliated for weeks had just saved lives while he himself had been powerless. For the first time, Victor saw something terrifying. True strength did not need to scream. Over the next few days, the town slowly recovered from the storm. People whispered about Elias differently now. They remembered how calm he remained when danger arrived. They remembered how quickly panic disappeared when he spoke. Meanwhile, Victor isolated himself inside his damaged building, haunted by shame and confusion. He could not understand how a man who never fought back could possess greater strength than everyone around him. One morning, unable to sleep any longer, Victor walked quietly to Elias's repair shop before sunrise. The streets were empty except for the sound of distant birds and cold wind moving through the market. Elias was already working beside a small lamp. Victor stood silently for several moments before finally asking, "How do you stay calm when people treat you cruelly?" Elias stopped working, looked at the rising sun beyond the window, and answered softly, "Because the opinions of angry people are temporary, but the habits we build inside ourselves become our destiny." The conversation between Victor and Elias spread quietly across the town, though nobody knew exactly what had been said inside the repair shop that morning. People only noticed that Victor stopped mocking Elias publicly. The tea stall where men once laughed at the silent repairman suddenly became quieter whenever Elias passed by. Yet not everyone changed. Some still believed Elias was simply pretending to be wise because he lacked the courage to fight like other men. One of those people was Daniel, a young blacksmith known for his temper and pride. Daniel believed strength meant domination. He admired powerful men who shouted loudly, intimidated others, and never accepted disrespect. To him, Elias represented everything weak. One afternoon, Daniel entered a repair shop carrying a broken lantern. He slammed it on the counter and said, "People are starting to worship you because you stayed calm during a storm. But calmness means nothing in the real world. A man who never fights back gets crushed." Elias examined the lantern carefully before answering, "Fire that burns too wildly destroys its own fuel." Daniel laughed harshly. "That sounds poetic, but life is not poetry." Elias looked at him quietly and replied, "No, life is discipline." Daniel rolled his eyes and left the shop angrily, but those words followed him long after he walked away. Over the following weeks, Daniel's anger began causing problems everywhere. He argued with customers, fought with workers, and even insulted his closest friends during moments of frustration. Slowly, people avoided him. Yet, instead of reflecting on his behavior, Daniel blamed everyone else. One evening, after losing an important business deal because of his aggressive attitude, he exploded with rage inside the market square, shouting at anyone nearby. In the middle of his outburst, he noticed Elias sitting peacefully outside his shop, repairing an old clock beneath the evening sunlight. The sight infuriated him even more. "How can you sit there so peacefully while people walk all over you?" Daniel shouted. Elias calmly continued working and answered, "Because I stopped giving strangers control over my emotions." The crowd watching nearby became silent. Daniel stepped closer and pointed angrily at him. "You think staying silent makes you superior?" Elias finally looked up and said, "No, but reacting to everything makes you predictable." Those words hit Daniel harder than any insult ever could. For the first time in years, he had no response. He simply stood there breathing heavily while the crowd watched. Elias returned to repairing the clock, completely unbothered by the tension around him. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. Deep inside, he realized something painful. Every time someone insulted him, he lost control immediately. Every opinion affected him. Every criticism ruined his peace. He had spent his entire life believing emotional reactions were proof of strength, but now he wondered if they were actually proof of weakness. Meanwhile, Elias continued living the same simple life. He woke before sunrise, cleaned his small shop, repaired broken machines, and spent evenings reading ancient Stoic teachings beside a lantern. Unlike others, he never chased admiration. He never tried to appear powerful. Yet slowly, without effort, people began respecting him more than the loudest men in town. Mothers told their children stories about his patience. Shopkeepers greeted him warmly. Even people who once mocked him now lowered their eyes in quiet shame whenever they passed him. Elias noticed a change, but he did not become proud because of it. He understood something most people never learn. Praise is just as dangerous as criticism when your happiness depends on it. So while the town slowly transformed its opinion of him, Elias remained exactly the same, calm, disciplined, and free from the emotional chains that controlled everyone else as autumn arrived. Cold winds swept the town and business became difficult for many families. Money grew scarce. Tensions increased and arguments filled the streets more often than laughter. During hard times, people revealed their true character. Some became selfish. Others became cruel. Fear turned neighbors against each other. Yet Elias continued helping anyone who entered his repair shop, even those who could not afford to pay him. An elderly woman once brought him a broken music box that had belonged to her late husband. She apologized with tears in her eyes because she had no money. Elias repaired it anyway and returned it with a gentle smile. When she asked why he helped without payment, Elias answered softly, "Not every valuable thing can be measured with coins." Stories like this spread quietly through the town, and soon people started visiting Elias not only to repair objects, but also to seek advice. Some came with heartbreak. Others came with anger, jealousy, fear, or regret. Strangely, the man who once seemed invisible had become the only person capable of calming others. One evening, a young merchant rushed into the shop, trembling with panic after losing a large amount of money in a failed investment. "My life is ruined," he said desperately. "Everything is over." Elias poured him a cup of tea and replied calmly, "If losing money destroys you completely, then you built your identity on something temporary." The merchant stared at him silently. Elias continued, "A calm mind survives losses better than a wealthy mind controlled by fear." The young merchant stayed there for hours, listening quietly while the rain fell outside. For the first time since losing his money, his breathing slowed. Elias never promised magical solutions. He simply reminded people that suffering becomes worse when panic controls a mind. But while many were beginning to admire Elias, others secretly hated him even more. One of those men was Marcus, a politician who controlled many decisions in the town. Marcus built his influence by manipulating fear and creating division between people. He enjoyed being admired and could not tolerate anyone receiving respect without seeking power. The growing influence of Elias disturbed him deeply. People are beginning to trust a repairman more than their leaders. Marcus complained during a meeting, "The silent fool is dangerous." Several men agreed nervously. Marcus decided he would publicly destroy Elias's reputation before his influence grew further. Days later, during a crowded gathering in the market square, Marcus climbed onto a wooden platform and began giving a speech about strength, leadership, and authority. Halfway through, he suddenly pointed toward Elias, who was quietly walking to the crowd carrying his old tool bag. "There stands a man this town foolishly admires," Marcus announced loudly. "A man who hides behind silence because he fears confrontation. Tell me, Elias, if you are truly wise, why have you achieved nothing important?" The crowd turned toward Elias immediately. Some looked nervous. Others waited eagerly for humiliation. Elias stopped walking and looked calmly at Marcus. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. The silence itself became powerful. Finally, Elias answered in a steady voice. "A man obsessed with proving his importance usually fears being forgotten." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Marcus's face tightened with anger. He tried to laugh it off, but Elias continued speaking before he could interrupt. "True strength is not measured by how many people obey you. It is measured by how peacefully you live when nobody is watching." The market became completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment. Marcus felt something terrifying. The crowd was listening to Elias more carefully than they had listened to him. Furious, Marcus shouted, "You think silence makes you wise?" Elias replied calmly, "No, but constant noise often hides emptiness." Several people lowered their eyes because they knew the words were true. Marcus ended the gathering abruptly and stormed away humiliated. But Elias simply continued walking home as though nothing unusual had happened. That night, while the town buzzed with discussions about the confrontation, Elias sat alone beside a candle reading quietly from an old Stoic book. He understood something deeply important. When your peace depends on defeating others, you will never truly be peaceful. And while powerful men wasted their lives chasing control of the world, Elias continued mastering the only thing he believed truly mattered: himself. Winter arrived early that year, bringing freezing winds and endless gray skies that covered the town in sadness. Businesses struggled. Food became expensive, and many families faced hardships they had never experienced before. Fear spread quickly because difficult times reveal how fragile most people's confidence truly is. Men who once acted powerful now complained constantly. Friends betrayed each other over money. Families argued over small frustrations. Everywhere Elias looked, he saw the same truth repeating itself. People who never trained their minds became slaves to circumstances. One icy morning, while snow drifted softly across the empty streets, Elias noticed a young man sitting outside his shop with tears frozen on his face. His name was Adrian, a worker from the nearby factory that had recently closed. He had lost his job, his savings, and the respect of people who once admired him. "Everything is falling apart," Adrian whispered hopelessly when Elias invited him inside. "I feel useless now." Elias placed another piece of wood into the fire and replied calmly, "Most people confuse their value with their success. That is why failure destroys them." Adrian stared into the flames silently. Elias continued, "Storms do not build character. They reveal it." The young man listened carefully while warmth slowly returned to his frozen hands. Elias explained that life will always change unexpectedly. Wealth disappears. Relationships end. Status fades. But a disciplined mind can survive almost anything. "If your peace depends on perfect circumstances," Elias said softly, "you will never know peace for long." Those words planted something powerful inside Adrian. Over the following weeks, he returned often to the repair shop, helping Elias clean tools and organize broken machines while listening to his quiet wisdom. For the first time in months, Adrian stopped drowning in self-pity and began rebuilding himself mentally. But outside the shop, darkness continued growing inside the town. Marcus, still furious over his public humiliation, secretly spread rumors that Elias manipulated weak-minded people with fake wisdom. Some believed him, others did not. Yet Marcus became obsessed with destroying Elias completely, because he could not stand the idea of losing influence to a silent repairman. One night, he ordered several men to vandalize Elias's shop. They shattered windows, destroyed tools, and painted cruel insults across the walls. By morning, a crowd gathered outside the ruined building expecting anger, heartbreak, or revenge from Elias. But when Elias arrived and saw the destruction, he simply stood quietly for a moment beneath the cold winter sky. Then he picked up a broken piece of wood and calmly began cleaning the mess. People watched in disbelief. Adrian, furious after seeing the damage, shouted, "How can you stay calm after this?"